The scene shifted to Dobrekiti, the northernmost edge of the empire's central region. Dalmatia, the Baron of Dobrekiti, slammed his hand onto the table in fury, repeatedly demanding to know whether the incident had happened yet again, and expressing disbelief that it had occurred once more. He harshly questioned what his subordinates thought they were doing, complaining that every time barley seeds were sown, someone inevitably came and dug up the entire field as if they had been waiting for it. The two soldiers hesitated and attempted to explain that despite having posted guards throughout the night, by morning the fields had already been disturbed. Before they could finish, Dalmatia cut them off angrily, refusing to accept any excuses. The soldiers immediately lowered their heads and apologized, clutching their heads in frustration. Dalmatia lamented that there was nothing useful about the territory at all. He complained that the land lacked fertile soil and a mild climate, and that the only resources they could rely on were the dense forests and barley farming. He grimly stated that if they could not even sow crops at this time of year, they would inevitably starve to death. Another man hesitantly pointed out that they only had soldiers stationed within the domain. Losing his temper completely, Dalmatia hurled the half-finished glass of wine at the man's head. He then barked orders that if they were short on troops, they should shackle the domain's people in iron and force them to work, declaring that starvation was imminent and that he did not care about the commoners. He insisted that the sabotage was undoubtedly the work of monsters from the forest and commanded that every available soldier be gathered to protect the barley fields. The two men respectfully acknowledged his orders and withdrew. Dalmatia did not respond further. He massaged his temples and complained that his head was aching, wondering aloud whether he should hire mercenaries. He then lifted his gaze toward the forest, remarking that the cursed woods felt especially eerie that day. The scene shifted to the gloomy forest. Various supplies, pepper, salt, jerky, and more were laid out on the ground. Goth asked what it was all supposed to be, and Vlad explained that it was a pilgrim's certificate written for him by Father Andreas. Goth frowned and remarked sarcastically that Vlad had remembered to pack all the rare and expensive items, yet somehow had not thought to bring even a single flint. Avoiding Goth's gaze, Vlad retorted that Goth was hardly one to talk, pointing out that he had only brought a useless flint anyway. Goth protested that he had indeed brought one, insisting that Vlad had smashed it to pieces and demanding that he look at the result. Vlad blankly replied that the flint had been defective. Enraged, Goth cursed the excuse and accused Vlad of deliberately breaking it. Vlad ignored him entirely. Growing anxious, Goth urged him to hurry and start rubbing together to make fire, warning that if they camped there, they would freeze to death. Vlad snapped that he could not do this anymore and picked up his sword. Goth stiffened in fear and hurriedly waved his hands, stammering that Vlad must simply be tired and promising to start rubbing immediately. Suddenly, Vlad called out to someone nearby, asking whether they had a flint and requesting to borrow one. All while staring into the forest, Goth stood there in confusion, unable to grasp what was happening. From within the dark woods came a provocative sound and a large figure emerged, commenting that it seemed Vlad had sharp ears. Goth reacted in horror as he realized they were bandits. One of them remarked that if the pair had noticed them, they should have run away immediately instead of trying to act tough. His expression briefly shifted in surprise as Vlad locked eyes with him in silence. Growing even more intrigued, the bandit commented that with a face like Vlad's they could sell him anywhere for a good price. One of the subordinates chimed in mockingly, asking which noble house Vlad belonged to, and suggesting that if he revealed his parents' identities, they might be able to return him to his family in exchange for a reasonable ransom. Completely unfazed, Vlad calmly asked whether any of them had a flint bluntly, telling them to check and see if they had one at all. The bandit sneered contemptuously, demanding to know what Vlad thought he was even saying and questioning whether he had lost his mind. From the very beginning, Vlad had regarded the man with barely concealed disdain. Hanging from the bandit's body was jewelry fashioned from human fingers. Vlad slowly drew his sword, remarking coldly that it no longer mattered, for when he had left his hometown he had already made his decision. His eyes flashed sharply, causing the bandits to frown in rising tension. Vlad styled himself inwardly, vowing that he would reclaim the dulled resolve he had possessed at the start, and ordered them to hand over everything they had. At that moment the leader of the bandits began to tremble. Vlad's voice turned icy as he added that their lives were to be surrendered as well, declaring that they were worth less than animals. In the end nothing remained but the screams of the bandits as they cried out in agony, their suffering spreading throughout the forest. At the entrance to the area, two guards muttered uneasily about the cursed forest, remarking that it felt especially eerie that day. The other replied that it felt as though something might leap out at any moment, then quickly urged him not to joke about such things, noting that unpleasant rumors were already circulating. Suddenly, they noticed a figure approaching. The two guards raised their spears defensively and shouted in unison, demanding to know who was there. What they saw first was a pitch-black silhouette belonging to a steed with piercing eyes and gleaming white fangs. The guards recoiled in horror, believing it to be a monster. From the top of the creature's back, Vlad calmly commanded it not to bite them. Only then did the guards breathe a sigh of relief, realizing it was merely a horse. Vlad instructed them to lower their spears, explaining that he had captured the bandits who had been causing trouble in the area. The guards stared at him in disbelief, asking if he meant the vicious criminals who had massacred nearby villagers. At that moment, a group of people in ragged condition was led forward, tightly bound with chains and ropes. In their hands were the severed head of their leader. A sight so horrifying it sent chills down the spine. The guards gaped, unable to believe what they were seeing. Vlad then stated his intention to meet the Lord, introducing himself as Vlad of Sera, a knight of Bazid. The scene shifted to a manner where Dalatia welcomed him with cheerful laughter, expressing amazement that a knight who had proven himself would come to Derek. Vlad bowed respectfully and conveyed his gratitude for the hospitality. Dalatia praised him for capturing the men who had been plaguing the territory, remarking that as the lord of the land he could hardly refuse to welcome such a guest. He then suggested setting formalities aside and invited Vlad to take a seat and make himself comfortable. Vlad sat down across from Dalatia, who smiled broadly and confirmed that Vlad had captured 9 bandits. Vlad corrected him, stating that the number was 15 if the severed heads they carried were included, though a few had managed to escape. Dalatia clicked his tongue in admiration and promised to reward him generously. Vlad offered his thanks with solemn composure. As Dalatia poured him a drink, he observed that since Vlad was a knight who carried a banner, he assumed Vlad sought to prove himself. Vlad affirmed that this was indeed the case. Dalatia went on to say that there was something he wished to request of him, emphasizing that it concerned a true knight who pursued honor. Vlad, however, already understood the man's intentions. Internally he concluded that Dalatia merely planned to use him without proper compensation. He decided that he would accept the reward for capturing the bandits and leave at an appropriate time, as his immediate priority was to focus on finding traces of the mysterious voice. Dalatia then explained that strange things had been occurring in the domain. Although it was the season for sowing barley, the seeds vanished the moment they were scattered across the fields. Even when soldiers were posted to guard the fields throughout the night, the seeds disappeared without a trace. Dalatia reasoned that if animals or monsters were responsible, the soldiers would surely have noticed something. He added that some of the elderly folk in the domain believed the phenomenon to be the work of spirits dwelling within the forest. Upon hearing this, Vlad showed visible surprise. The scene shifted once more to the forest where an innocent young girl wandered while softly humming to herself about wild berries. She delighted in the taste, thinking happily that they were delicious and that her mother would like them as well. She suddenly sensed that something was wrong. In confusion, she turned around only to find herself being stared down by a massive shadow with 2 glaring luminous eyes. Goth remarked that something about the place felt wrong. He observed that the area was clearly impoverished to the point where the people likely did not even have enough money to eat, let alone pay a bounty. He suggested that they should forget about any reward altogether. Vlad replied that the man had promised to reward them generously. Goth scoffed at that, saying that anyone could make such claims. He added that he could tell at a glance when someone was not the type to pay, and that the Lord fit that description perfectly. According to him, when the time came to open his purse, the man would surely be busy making excuses instead. He concluded that they should have demanded an advanced payment. Vlad calmly told him that such matters were for Goth to handle. Taken aback, Goth asked what Vlad meant. Vlad then questioned why Sir Joseph would keep a knight around who could not even wield a sword properly. He went on to ask whether Goth knew Sir Vortin's nickname. Goth froze, admitting that he had no idea. Lowering his voice, Vlad revealed that Sir Vortin was known as Varden the Swindler. Goth reacted in shock, asking if Vlad was referring to that shabby-looking lord. Vlad smirked slightly and remarked that perhaps the man's face worked to his advantage. In any case, he explained that Sir Joseph valued that particular trait of Vortin's, believing that everyone had their own use. Vlad then stated that whether it was an advance or a bounty, Goth would be responsible for handling such matters from now on. Goth pointed to himself in disbelief, asking if Vlad truly meant him. Raising an eyebrow, Vlad told him to go and show that baron from the central region the northern tongue he possessed, one that had been tempered through countless scams. At first, Goth was startled by the idea, but once he understood Vlad's intention, he responded with an equally sinister expression. Later that night, in a deserted field, Vlad listened with a serious expression as a knight spoke at length. The knight explained that the forest of Dobrekiti was ancient and because of that, riddled with countless legends and strange tales. He then mentioned that a child had gone missing that very morning, and that the incident was said to have occurred in the forest nearby. According to the villagers, a deep pit had been dug near a patch of wild strawberries. As the knight continued talking, Vlad inwardly complained that the man talked far too much. He thought that the basics of an ambush relied on discretion, and that even for a knight in some insignificant domain this level of chatter was excessive. He wondered whether the man lacked common sense altogether. Meanwhile, the knight went on lamenting the tragedy, saying that the child had been a good and well-behaved girl. Just as he began to mention that the girl's mother had been crying and wailing in the Lord's manor all day, and awkwardly started to ask for their assistance in finding the child, Vlad abruptly raised a hand and covered the knight's mouth, signaling for silence. Startled, the knight wondered in confusion what was happening and questioned the strange look on Vlad's face. Not far away stood a dark, forbidding forest. Vlad keenly sensed that something was off and immediately dashed forward. The knight hurriedly ordered everyone to run and follow Sir Vlad, calling out to him in alarm. Vlad landed in the field ahead and the others rushed over in a panic, demanding to know what he was suddenly doing. With a grim expression, Vlad stared at the ground and stated that they had been robbed. The knight, unable to believe his ears, asked him to repeat himself. Moments later, he realized the situation in horror, exclaiming how such a thing could be possible when the seeds they had scattered as bait had vanished without a trace. Vlad turned to one of the soldiers and asked whether he had brought a shovel. The soldier confirmed that he had and handed it over. Taking the shovel, Vlad began digging, convinced that he had definitely heard something earlier despite seeing no movement and finding no footprints. He then asked how far the place where the child had gone missing was from their current location. The knight replied that it was very close and asked why Vlad wanted to know. After digging for a while, the ground suddenly collapsed, revealing a hollow space beneath. The knight exclaimed in shock, wondering what it was. Vlad looked down into the opening and muttered thoughtfully that he could not even begin to guess how deep it was, adding that it could not have been dug by a human. He then addressed the knight captain, asking him to lead the way and stating that they would need to go to the location where the child had disappeared. Later, back in the village, Dalatia asked what Sir Vlad was doing at that moment. A man reported that after visiting the site where the child had vanished, Sir Vlad was now gathering the village elders. Dalatia frowned as he asked why the elders were involved. The knight replied that it seemed the man was trying to inquire about the past, specifically the traditions that had been passed down in that region. Hearing this, Dalatia spoke in a sharp tone, expressing his concern over whether those old people might start spouting some bizarre nonsense. The knight countered by wondering whether they should not have grown wiser with age. Clearly dissatisfied, Dalatia ran a hand through his hair and stated that the elders would not say anything that could be used against them in front of an unknown knight. He added that the banner bore the emblem of San Rosino, which meant the knight must have deep ties with the Vatican. Dalatia reflected that he could not tell the man to stop now since he himself had made the request, yet he felt the knight was digging too deeply. In the end, Dalatia made a decision and ordered that someone be assigned to tail the knight and ensure that he did not pry into anything strange. The scene then shifted to outside the village, where Goth asked the elders whether there was truly nothing that came to mind. He said that even now, the child was probably trapped in some pit, desperately seeking a helping hand. With tears welling in his eyes, he spoke of a small, fragile child left in pitch-black darkness, imagining her sobbing as her tears dried up and she cried in silence. As he cried, Goth carefully observed the elders and insisted that surely something had to come to mind. He went on to say that this was not the first time such an incident had occurred, reminding them that barley had disappeared before as well. Only then did one of the elders finally speak, recalling that when they were young they used to hold certain rites, but after the Vatican came and forbade them, they stopped performing them, cursing the Vatican under their breath. Vlad then spoke up, pointing out that no child had ever been sucked into a pit back then, though some had been taken by wolves, and he asked what those rites had been for. The elders lifted their heads to look at him, but soon afterwards, as if by unspoken agreement, they all lowered their heads and fell silent. Goth pressed them again, asking what kind of rites they had been, warning that if they did not speak they would not be able to save the child. He emphasized that this winter was unusually cold, and implied that if the little one froze to death, the consequences would be dire. After much hesitation, one old man finally admitted that the rites were for an earth spirit. Vlad probed further, asking him to explain in more detail. At that moment Goth turned to Vlad and whispered that he should step outside for now, explaining that no matter how young he was still a knight, one who bore the Vatican's emblem. He cautioned that the elders were closely watching how Vlad reacted, and that if things continued this way, even those willing to share would shut their mouths. Vlad reluctantly agreed and stepped outside, telling Goth to find out everything he could. Outside, someone was already waiting for Vlad and politely asked if he might have a word with him, claiming that the rites were nothing strange. Vlad replied that he was aware the rites were considered idolatry forbidden by the Vatican, and that if they were discovered it could bring serious punishment. The man reacted with surprise, but Vlad calmly stated that he understood, acknowledging that there were rules people had upheld for a long time. When the man hesitantly suggested what that might mean, Vlad continued by saying that he had heard nothing about earth spirits or rites in that village, swearing to God that he would focus solely on finding the missing child and the barley thief. He told the man to stop watching him, and to make sure that message was clearly relayed to his lord as well. The man bowed politely, apologized for offending him, and thanked him for his consideration before leaving. Soon after, Goth approached and addressed Vlad. Vlad asked whether he had found anything, and Goth replied that the elders said it was not exactly a ghost in the frightening sense, but rather something that made the land fertile if rights were held for it. He explained that when farming one often had to dig deep into the ground, and according to the elders the earth spirit had done that for them. He dismissed it all as nonsense. Vlad, however, thought to himself that it might not be nonsense after all. Reflecting that there were snakes that lived in trees, Goth then leaned in closer and added the unsettling detail that the place where the ground had been dug was the forest where the rites had been held long ago. He added that the thing seemed to like barley and lived underground. Slightly surprised, Vlad remarked that if it lived underground it probably liked dark places as well. Inwardly, Vlad reflected that rites, earth spirits, offerings and spirits all sounded different, but in truth they were the same thing. He then instructed Goth to go get some barley. Goth, startled, asked why, to which Vlad replied in an eerie tone that he had already dragged a monster out from underground before, and that this time he needed Jari to set the stage once again.